You know, when you picture the security at an incredibly exclusive, high-stakes VIP club, you usually imagine this massive hulking presence at the door.
Right, like a giant bouncer.
Yeah, exactly. Someone who physically dominates the entrance, checking the list and making absolutely sure that none of the riffraff gets inside to ruin the party. You want the protection to physically match the value of whatever is inside, right?
Well, yeah. It's the natural human bias towards scale. We inherently trust mass and armor, especially in industrial environments.
Oh, for sure.
When we look at a multi-million-dollar production line, the instinct is to focus on the massive physical safeguards. You know, the heavy steel casings, the blast walls, the giant vibration dampeners. We bias our attention toward the macro level of asset protection.
But what if the bouncer at this multi-million-dollar club wasn't a giant? What if the most ruthless, unbribable protector standing between a catastrophic failure and a smoothly running plant was, like, barely 3 inches tall?
It sounds crazy, but it's true.
Right. Today we are going deep into the mechanics of contamination control for this deep dive. We're specifically looking at a device that completely flips that bias on its head. It's the Air Sentry Z-134 desiccant breather.
It's a tiny powerhouse.
It really is. Because it turns out the true battle for reliability isn't fought against massive physical impacts. It's fought at the molecular level against a microscopic enemy that quietly causes, six-figure failures right under our noses.
And that invisible enemy is simply the ambient air floating around the plant floor.
Just the air we breathe.
Exactly. I mean, we tend to view air as benign, but in the context of industrial fluids, it is an incredibly aggressive contaminant. To understand why a device like the Z-134 is necessary, we really have to look at the fluid dynamics and thermodynamics happening inside those heavy casings.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we're talking about the concept of machinery breathing, which is something that gets overlooked even by experienced maintenance teams, I think.
Oh, all the time.
A gearbox or a hydraulic reservoir isn't a static sealed vault. When the system is running under load, the internal temperatures spike. The oil expands, the air above the oil heats up and expands, and
the internal pressure pushes that air out through the vent.
Right.
It's a continuous volumetric exchange. And the inverse happens when the load drops or the machine powers down. The internal volume cools, the fluid contracts, and you get a localized pressure drop inside the casing.
it has to pull air back in.
Exactly. To equalize that pressure, the reservoir has to pull ambient air back in. It literally inhales. And if you are in, say, a paper mill, a primary metals plant, or a power generation facility, that ambient air is heavily loaded with water vapor.
Which introduces the core problem, right?
Yeah.
Condensation.
Yep, condensation.
Because humid air gets pulled into a cooling reservoir, hits the metal walls of the casing, which are cooling faster than the oil, by the way, and you drop below the dew point, suddenly you aren't just dealing with invisible vapor.
No, you actually have liquid water forming on the inside of the tank and running down into the oil.
Just dripping right into the lifeblood of the machine.
What's fascinating here is the sheer speed of the chemical degradation that follows. I mean, water doesn't just sit harmlessly at the bottom of a sump.
Right, it's not just a puddle doing nothing.
Far from it. It actively participates in hydrolysis, breaking down the molecular structure of the base oil, and stripping out the additive packages.
So it's tearing apart the chemistry of the oil itself.
Exactly. Your extreme pressure additives, your rust inhibitors, your anti-wear agents like ZDDP water just attacks those chemical bonds.
And it leaves behind acidic byproducts. But wait, here's the part of this contamination cycle I really want to push back on, because it initially seems completely counterintuitive to me.
Okay, what's that?
The text says the introduction of humidity also leads to severe microbial contamination. Bacteria. How does a biological colony establish a foothold inside a synthetic oil environment?
It does seem weird, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the additive packages and the base stocks themselves are incredibly harsh. It doesn't seem like an environment where organic life could thrive at all.
You'd think so, but bacteria and fungi are incredibly opportunistic. Industrial oils actually contain plenty of carbon sources.
Really? Like what?
Well, the hydrocarbons themselves, plus certain organic esters used in the formulation, that provides a massive food source.
Okay, so they have food.
Right, and the breathing action we just talked about provides a steady supply of oxygen. The missing catalyst is simply liquid water. Without the water, microorganisms remain completely dormant.
Ah, so the condensation provides the exact interface they need to actually metabolize the hydrocarbons.
You got it. The microbes live in the water but feed on the oil at the boundary layer.
That is wild.
And it gets worse. They excrete acidic waste that rapidly accelerates the oxidation of the oil, and they multiply, forming this thick, slimy biomass.
Gross.
Yeah, this biological sludge combines with the chemical varnish and the depleted additives to create a literally lethal cocktail for precision components.
And that cocktail translates directly to mechanical destruction, I imagine. Varnish coats the internal clearances of servo valves, causing them to stick. The acids etch the bearing surfaces, which creates microscopic pitting.
Yeah, it's a cascade of failures.
And then, as the metal begins to flake off from the pitting, those hardened metal particles get suspended in the fluid and act like liquid sandpaper throughout the entire hydraulic system. You're watching the machine's lifeblood turn toxic simply because it inhaled unfiltered plant air.
Which highlights the absolute futility of relying solely on inline fluid filtration.
Right, because by then it's too late.
Exactly. If you are waiting for the internal filters to catch the suspended particulate, or waiting for a scheduled oil analysis to tell you your fluid is oxidized, you are already losing the battle. The chemical degradation has already started.
The damage is done.
The wear generation has already occurred. The only effective strategy is proactive exclusion.
Which brings us to the Z-134, our tiny bouncer at the VIP club door.
The ruthless protector.
Right. If the goal is proactive exclusion, stopping the moisture in the dirt before it ever crosses the threshold of the reservoir, this device executes that with simple, brutal efficiency. Let's look at the physical anatomy. We are talking about a remarkably small footprint here.
It's surprisingly compact.
Yeah, it's just 3.25 inches in diameter and 3 inches tall, with a half-inch FNPT connection, which means it drops directly onto standard industrial plumbing fittings without needing custom adapters.
And that physical footprint is critical because real estate on top of a gearbox or a hydraulic power unit is usually highly constrained.
Oh, sure. You've got hoses and wires everywhere.
Exactly. You have piping, gauges, and structural framing in the way. A breather has to be compact enough to retrofit into tight clearances without creating a snag hazard for the operators.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Inside that compact housing, it utilizes staged filtration and a highly specific desiccant media, which is silica gel. I always picture this thing as a completely silent color-changing sponge.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. Because as the machine inhales, the incoming air is forced through a primary particulate filter to catch the bulk dirt, and then it passes through that silica gel bed.
And the mechanics of the silica gel are beautifully simple. Silica gel has a highly porous microscopic structure, giving it a massive internal surface area.
So it's basically full of tiny caves.
Yes. As the humid air passes through, the water molecules are trapped in those cores through adsorption. It literally strips the vapor out of the airstream. By the time the air reaches the headspace of the reservoir, the relative humidity has been crashed to near zero.
And then there's a final filtration layer before the air enters the tank, right? Just to ensure that no silica dust or microscopic contaminants make it into the oil.
That's correct.
And it does all of this completely passively. There are no power cords, no pneumatic hoses to attach, no complicated electronic sensors that require a technician to sit there and calibrate it.
In industrial engineering, the elimination of moving parts and external power requirements dramatically increases the reliability curve.
Less stuff to break.
Exactly. Active dehydration systems like vacuum dehydrators are highly effective, but they are complex, expensive, and require their own maintenance schedules. The Z-134 offers passive contamination control.
Just screw it on and walk away.
It's an install and forget mechanism that actively drives up the mean time between failures of the host machine by eliminating the root cause of the degradation entirely.
So what does this all mean? I mean, the engineering elegance is great, but getting a device deployed across an entire plant floor means the economics have to make sense to the front office. Maintenance budgets are always under scrutiny, so a preventative measure has to show immediate and measurable financial return.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the financial return isn't just about saving money on oil, it's about capital preservation.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, let's start with the immediate fluid life cycle. Trapping the moisture before it contaminates the oil extends the usable life of that fluid exponentially. You are drastically reducing the frequency of bulk oil purchases.
And the downstream costs of those purchases, too. I mean, disposing of hundreds of gallons of oxidized, contaminated industrial oil involves hefty hazardous waste fees.
Oh, absolutely. The disposal is expensive.
Not to mention the labor involved, pulling a maintenance tech off a proactive value-add project just to go flush a degraded hydraulic reservoir and lug heavy drums of new oil around the plant. That's a terrible use of skilled labor.
Exactly. The labor reallocation is a massive hidden saving. But the true economic weight of this strategy lies in asset protection. The components bathed in this oil, the thrust bearings, the high-pressure seals, the proportional servo valves, the gear teeth, these are highly sensitive, precision-machined elements.
They are just big chunks of dumb metal.
No, not at all. A servo valve controls a critical actuation, might have internal clearances measured in microns.
Wow. Microns.
A microscopic layer of rust or a single piece of hard particulate can bind that valve, triggering an unplanned shutdown of an entire production line.
And the cost of unplanned downtime dwarfs everything else. If an entire paper machine or stamping press goes down because a heavily loaded gearbox chewed itself to pieces after the oil viscosity sheared down, I mean, the cost of a replacement gearbox is almost irrelevant compared to the cost of lost production.
Millions of dollars, easily.
But honestly, it forces me to ask, in modern manufacturing, are companies really replacing entire, incredibly expensive gearboxes every 5 years just because of a little humidity? Are they really just running these massive six-figure assets to failure? It seems like an insane oversight in today's data-driven environments.
You'd be shocked. It happens much more frequently than the industry likes to admit.
Wait, really? Why?
Because often, moisture ingress is accepted as an unavoidable environmental reality rather than a controllable variable. An asset starts running hot, the oil analysis comes back with high water content, the fluid gets milky, and the maintenance strategy devolves into simply changing the oil more frequently.
Just putting a Band-Aid on it.
Until the bearings finally spall and the unit fails. They treat the symptom, not the source.
So the Z-134 flips that entire equation. For the cost of a few dollars worth of silica and plastic, you are radically extending the lifespan of a six-figure asset by locking down its environment. You're shifting from reactive symptom management to proactive root cause elimination.
That is the very essence of capital preservation. But, and this is important, it's also vital to understand the engineering limits of this specific intervention.
Right, there's always a catch.
No tool is universally applicable, and misapplying contamination control can actually induce the very failures you're trying to prevent.
That's a crucial point from our source material. The Z-134 has incredibly strict operational parameters. It's designed for small hydraulic reservoirs, accumulators, loop sumps, pilot bottles, and instrument housings.
Places with tight spatial constraints.
Right, and most importantly, low volumetric exchange rates. The hard limit here is airflow. This unit is rated for applications with an airflow of less than about 5 cubic feet per minute. That's the 5 CFM rule.
And that 5 CFM threshold dictates the physical boundary of the device's capability. The primary constraint is the residence time required for the silica gel to effectively absorb the moisture.
It needs time to actually grab the water out of the air.
Exactly. If the air rushes past too quickly, the gel can't do its job.
So let's look at the physics of what happens if someone gets this wrong. Put yourself in the shoes of a procurement manager. Say they see the wholesale price of the Z-134, they love the ROI, and they decide to standardize on it across the whole plant.
Oh boy.
They take this tiny 3-inch breather and thread it onto a massive 500-gallon hydraulic reservoir that operates with high-speed, high-volume cylinder actuations. We've got massive fluid displacement happening. What actually happens? Does the machine suffocate?
This raises an important question about system dynamics. If you force a high-flow system to breathe through a highly restrictive low-flow device, you create an immediate and severe pressure differential.
Because it can't get enough air.
Right. As the large hydraulic cylinders extend, fluid is rapidly pulled from the reservoir. The tank needs to inhale a massive volume of air instantly to fill that void.
But the tiny Z-134 acts like a cocktail straw. It physically cannot pass enough air to equalize the pressure in time.
Precisely. So the internal pressure of the reservoir drops precipitously, creating a vacuum. And industrial pumps are not designed to pull fluid against a high vacuum on the suction side.
Oh, I see where this is going.
The first thing that happens is pump cavitation. The localized pressure drop causes the dissolved air and water in the oil to flash into vapor bubbles. When those bubbles pass into the high pressure side of the pump, they implode with incredible violent force,
Like tiny explosions.
literally blasting microscopic pieces of metal off the internal pump components.
So by trying to save a few bucks and misapplying the breather, you destroy a $50,000 pump through cavitation.
It happens all the time. And
Yeah.
even if the pump survives, that vacuum is going to seek the path of least resistance.
What do you mean?
If it can't pull air through the breather, it will pull it right past the main shaft seals. It ends up sucking ambient dirt and moisture directly into the system, completely bypassing your filtration.
Which defeats the entire purpose.
Which is why matching the device's CFM rating to the maximum fluid displacement rate of the system is a non-negotiable engineering requirement. High-flow vents require larger, high-capacity breathers or continuous active dehydration systems. You must size the protection to the dynamics of the asset.
That requirement naturally brings up the logistical challenge of managing all this. You don't just buy one breather. A medium-sized plant might need hundreds of them, all sized differently for different applications, which requires an ecosystem of support.
You definitely need a system in place.
The integration of suppliers like PE Energy and Whitmore becomes the linchpin of actually making this work at a fleet level.
Because a desiccant breather is a consumable item. It is not an infinite resource. The silica gel has a finite adsorption capacity.
It fills up.
Yeah. Once all those microscopic pores are filled with water molecules, the gel changes color typically from gold to dark green or blue to pink, depending on the dye, indicating that the media is fully saturated.
The bouncer is asleep at the door.
That's one way to put it.
And having a saturated breather sitting on a gearbox is functionally worse than having no breather at all, right? You have the restriction in the airflow we just talked about, but zero moisture removal. It gives the maintenance team a complete false sense of security.
That's the danger.
They walk by, see a device threaded onto the vent, and assume the asset is protected, while humid air is streaming right past the spent silica.
That false sense of security is exactly why fleet-level management goes beyond just bulk purchasing. You need drop-in compatibility across different machine types, but more importantly, you need a highly structured inventory and replenishment system.
Because keeping track of hundreds of these things manually is impossible.
Managing the service intervals based on the ambient humidity of the specific plant environment is absolutely critical.
It's the difference between buying a piece of hardware and implementing an actual reliability program. Partners like PE Energy provide the infrastructure to coordinate those bulk shipments, track the life cycles, and send active media replacement alerts.
It takes the guesswork out of it.
Exactly. It completely removes the human error of a busy technician simply forgetting to visually inspect the breather during their rounds.
It systematizes the preventative maintenance. The hardware executes the exclusion, but the logistical support guarantees the hardware is always in a functional state.
Which perfectly distills the core lesson of everything we've looked at today. If you are responsible for the health of oil-filled gear, pumps, motors, or sensitive control cabinets, managing the microenvironment is not an optional luxury. It's an absolute operational necessity.
It's mandatory if you want reliability.
Installing a Z-134, or a properly sized equivalent, is incredibly cheap. Instantaneous insurance that takes less time to install than it does to drink a cup of coffee.
It is the purest industrial manifestation of the concept that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Very well said.
By aggressively and passively controlling the invisible variables, the relative humidity and the microscopic particulates, you eliminate the chemical and biological chain reactions before they ever have a chance to initiate. You don't manage wear, you prevent it entirely.
It's a masterclass in applying a simple, highly targeted intervention to solve massive compounding problems. It completely reorients how you look at the heavy machinery around us. The scale of a protection doesn't need to match the scale of the asset. It just needs to perfectly counter the scale of the threat.
And the threat is almost always microscopic.
It really is. And looking at how a tiny piece of silica and plastic can save a massive six-figure machine by strictly controlling what it's allowed to breathe leaves us with a fascinating parallel to consider for ourselves. Yeah, think about it. If catastrophic mechanical failures are so easily triggered by tiny, invisible contaminants slipping through the front door unnoticed, what are the invisible contaminants we are passively letting into our own business processes, our workflows, or even our decision-making? What small, daily inputs are we failing to filter that are slowly compounding into massive systemic failures down the line? Keep an eye on your entryways. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.